Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back, Chairman Powell. The economy certainly has come roaring back from COVID. GDP is above its pre-pandemic levels now, and the Fed forecasts GDP will grow by an amazing 7% this year. The unemployment rate is already at 5.9%, which the Fed expects to fall to 4.5% by the end of the year. And to put that in context, the average unemployment rate for the last 20 years before the pandemic was 6%. So with these conditions, the Fed's rationale for continuing negative real interest rates and a $1.4 trillion in annual bond purchases is puzzling. The Fed's policy is especially troubling because the warning siren for problematic inflation is getting louder. Inflation is here, and it's more severe than most, including the Fed itself, expected. And it is more than offsetting the wage gains, so leaving workers worse off despite their nominal wage increases. For the third month in a row, the Consumer Price Index was higher than expectations. Core CPI, which excludes volatile categories like food and energy, was up 4.5% in June, the highest reading in almost 30 years. And to be clear, this is beyond the so-called base effects. The two-year change in core CPI was at a 25-year high. And with housing prices absolutely soaring in many places to completely unaffordable levels, I have to ask, why on earth is the Fed still buying $40 billion in mortgage-backed bonds each month? Now, the Fed assures us that this inflation is transitory, but its inflation projections over the last year have not inspired confidence. Last June, the Fed projected that PCE, one standard measure of inflation, would be 1.6% for the 12 months ending 2021. Then in December, the Fed raised that figure up to 1.8%. And now the Fed's most recent PCE forecast for 2021 year-end is 3.4%, more than double what the Fed thought inflation would be a year ago. But in coming months, the Fed is almost certain to revise that projection up yet again, because so far this year, PCE has already risen by 6.1% on an annualized basis. Over the rest of the year, inflation would need to be nearly zero for the Fed's latest projection to be proven correct. I'm very concerned that the Fed's current paradigm almost guarantees that it will be behind the curve if inflation does become problematic and persistent for several reasons. First, as I pointed out, the Fed has consistently and systematically underestimated inflation over the last year. Second, the Fed has announced that it'll allow inflation to run above its 2% target level. Well, it's already well above 2%. And third, the Fed insists that the inflation we're experiencing now is transitory, despite the fact that recent unprecedented monetary accommodation has certainly driven the inflation that we're witnessing. And since the Fed has proven unable to forecast the level of inflation, why should we be confident that the Fed can forecast the duration of inflation? And after all, you can only know that something is in fact transitory after it's ended. What if it doesn't end? If it's wrong, by the time the Fed knows and acknowledges that it's gotten it wrong, we could have a big problem on our hands. And past experience has shown it's very difficult to get the inflation genie back in the bottle once it's out. The Fed may have to respond by raising interest rates much more aggressively to rein in significant inflation, and that could have severe adverse economic consequences. So the Fed's current monetary approach seems based on the premise that it needs to prioritize maximum employment over price stability, despite the fact that employment policies enacted by Congress are clearly impeding our ability to get back to maximum employment. But I would argue it's not the Fed's job to attempt to offset flawed congressional policies at the expense of its price stability mandate. And when the Fed subordinates its price stability mandate to try to maximize employment, the Fed runs the risk of failing on both fronts, because you need stable prices in order to achieve a strong economy and maximize employment. This is not a partisan argument. Prominent Democratic economists, including President Clinton's Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, President Obama's CEA Chairman Jason Furman, and many others have expressed their concern about the risk of rising and persistent inflation. Lastly, I just want to acknowledge the unique and crucial role played by the Fed in our economy and some of the responsibilities that attend to that. The ability to direct interest rates and control the money supply is, of course, an extraordinary power. And Congress has given the Fed a great deal of operational independence in order to isolate it from political interference. But Congress also gave the Fed a narrowly defined mission I'm troubled by the Fed, especially some of the regional banks, misusing this independence to wade into politically charged areas like global warming and racial justice. I'd suggest that instead of opining on issues that are clearly beyond the Fed's mission and expertise, it should focus on an issue that clearly is its mandate, controlling inflation. If it doesn't, the Fed will find that its credibility and independence may also have turned out to be transitory. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.